thanks for coming to our session today. We're going to talk for the next 30 minutes about how to connect your C-suite to the ground truth of your company. And I like the term ground truth a lot. It's a military term, and it refers to the kind of actual reality of the situation, right? Not what the generals thought it would be, right? Not what we planned it would be, not what the intelligence forecast it would be, but the actual reality of the situation. And I had to look up a word on this slide, conative. I'm standing in front of it, but I don't even know what conative meant. But it's kind of like what you will to be the situation. And that's not what the ground truth is, right? The ground truth is the reality of what's going on. And this is an old song, 1971, still too relevant today. but it's a good reminder that if you're a CEO or an executive at a startup, you should spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on. And that's your way of connecting to the ground truth. And by the way, just like the military analogy, it's not necessarily what your generals say is going on, right? Your E-staff or your generals or the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? The board, right? It's not what the operating plan said. What's going on is the reality of deals, conversations, and messaging in the field. And that's what we need to be connected to. And I think for two reasons. One, operational, right? It's hard to fix problems we don't know about. But two, strategic. And you might be surprised that I'd say strategic. And this brings up an interesting story, which is first, if you like strategy, this guy, Richard Rummelt, is the best author in the last 20 years in strategy. He's written 2 books, one called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and the other one called The Crux. If you only have time to read one, read The Crux. But they're both good. And he tells a story in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy that I really like. And it was the dean, he's a professor at UCLA, or he was, and the dean of UCLA Business School said, I want to teach strategy classes. So he sat in on 10 of Rummelt's lectures. And by lecture number 7, he went to Rummelt and said, you know, I think in every one of these cases you're teaching, there's really only one question being asked. And that question is, what is going on here? And this is what Rummelt wrote in response. He said, John, the guy's name was John, his comment was something I'd never heard said explicitly, but it was instantly and obviously correct. A great deal of strategy work is to try and figure out what's going on, not figuring out what to do, but the more fundamental problem of comprehending the situation. And I can tell you, the longer I work in software and in strategy, the absolutely more I believe this is true. When I was young, I was CMO of a $50 million company. Later grew on to be a $1 billion company, so things went well. But I called a strategy offsite, because marketing people do that sometimes. And I hired the Chasm Group, well-known marketing consultancy. And you know, they have their little Chasm model with about 6 segments. And most strategy, in my opinion, is you look at a model and you kind of say, you are here, and then based upon where you are, you know what to do. That's kind of strategy 101. So I figured we'd spend half a day looking at the Chasm Group model. We'd agree by lunch on where we were, and we'd spend the next 2.5 days talking about what to do about it. And you know what happened? 3 days of not agreeing on where we were. I was shocked, because to me, it's like, I thought I knew. I'm like, oh, I'll have this done by 9 o'clock. And we spent 3 days fighting about where we were. And that's when I realized that it's not just about understanding the situation, but if you're trying to lead a team, getting agreement on that, right? Because if people don't agree where you are in the curve, they're not going to agree what to do about it. So that's the reason knowing what's going on is both operational and strategic. The other reason is, I haven't blogged on this yet, and I write a blog called Kellogg. If you don't read it, you should check it out. I'm going to do a post on this soon. But this little matrix of execution versus strategy, working, not working, right? You have basically weak, strong, and I make 4 boxes, right? Working. And I've been in all these boxes, right? So, some people have had the privilege of only being in box 4. I've been in box 1. I've been in box 2. And I can tell you, when you're in box 4, you don't wonder about what box you're in. So I always tell people, if you're sitting around at your E-staff talking about whether you're in a red-hot market, you're not. Done. Because if you were, you wouldn't be talking about it. You'd be too busy executing, right? So there are people privileged to be in box 4, but most of us are in some other box. And I think on this, you know, the thing about this matrix is when things are kind of working, right? And how can they kind of work? Where you might be executing the heck out of an only an okay idea, right? Or you might be executing poorly actually a really good idea. And in both cases, it's going to look similar, that things are kind of working at the company. And how do you know which box you're in? Right? The answer is you need to know what's going on, right? If you're in calls, on deals, listening to conversations, doing market research, talking to customers, watching your execution, you're going to develop a pretty strong sense. Because you can develop an intuitive sense about whether execution is good or bad. It's much harder to get an intuitive sense on strategy. So in some ways, we need execution to help us assess strategy. Did a blog post on this as well called Why Execution Matters, because I like to view myself as a strategic person, but I get incredibly detail-oriented, as those of you who read the blog will know. And the reason I get detail-oriented is if we're not executing well, I don't know if the strategy is good or bad. I don't know what box I'm in. So, and by the way, people bring biases to the party, right? I ran a company that I firmly believe was in box 2, grew it to $80 million in 6 years. The whole time, the board thought we were in box 3. The board was like, they're delivering fantastic results. The executive team is a little weird because I have a tendency to hire smart, weird people. So we're a little, standard deviation out on weird. I wonder if we got real executives, what they could do with this company. That was kind of their point of view. They're like, you're in box 3, and if we upgrade the team, we're going to be in box 4. Our point of view was we're in box 2, and we're executing the heck out of this. We had 16 competitors, 15 went out of business. That's our proof for being in box 2. And in the end, I left the company, and they tried to move from box 3 to box 4, ended up moving from box 2 to box 1. It destroyed hundreds of millions of value because they didn't know what's going on, right? They didn't understand the situation. So it is incredibly important to understand the situation. And management teams are paid to execute, so they're always going to say they're in box 2, right? And boards, well, I invested in the idea. It was clearly a great idea. So if things aren't going well, it can't possibly be the idea. It has to be these clowns running the company, right? So the boards are going to default to box 3, and your executive is going to default to box 2, right? So this is not an unbiased equation. And by the way, the founder wants to know if we're in box 1 or box 3. Are we on the edge? If we can just keep pushing, are we going to hit the hockey stick and realize everyone's dreams? Or are we going to just be sailing upwind, right? Which is called beating or pushing. Are we going to be, we'll make progress, but every yard is hard work. Where are we? I want to know that. So this is why knowing what's going on is so important. Basically, do we have a good idea? If something's not really working, is it a good idea poorly executed, or is it just a bad idea? Ultimately, the question. And I like to use trade shows as an example because my background is in marketing. This is both a metaphor for a company and a real example. And I'd like you to ask, what is this seller texting back to corporate? What do you think? Do you think they're saying what a great trade show it's been? I don't think so. I think they're saying it's been a bad show. And I look at that and go, with your execution, right, you're sitting in the booth looking at the ground on your phone, right? To me, I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea, because if you did that all day, you executed it poorly, right? And I use this example again because I've literally been on a floor like this, because I believe executives should work the booth. Why? So they know what's going on, right? So I'd be on the floor, and at 5 o'clock, we'd be packing up our booth, high-fiving each other, going, this is the best show. And the guy next to us would be on the phone calling corporate saying this stunk. And I'm just like, we're at the same show, I'm right next to you, and somehow we had a great experience and you had a bad one, right? Maybe it's execution. So I just think it's incredibly important to know what's going on. And what's going on is the ground truth. And the problem, just to summarize it, is 2 things. One, the C-suite can quickly lose touch with the ground truth. And that means 2 things. 1, you can't fix execution problems you don't know about. And 2, you can't assess strategy. So if you don't know what's going on, it's actually very hard to do your job as CEO. And you might think you know what's going on, but I'm going to give you, if you're not doing the 3 things we're going to talk about in a minute, maybe you can get better at it. And we'll talk about that. And look, you might think this is a big company problem because I've worked literally between 0 and $1 billion, so actually up to $3 billion in revenue. And certainly this is a problem with big companies, no question. At a big company with layers and layers of management, you can easily lose touch. It can happen at startups. As soon as you have a layer of management, as soon as you stop doing every sales call yourself, as soon as you're asking people how the sales calls went, as opposed to listening to them, right? As soon as you're just listening to how'd the show go, instead of watching it and participating in it, you're losing touch. So it can happen amazingly early. And I don't think it's bad motivations. I just think it's human nature, for what it's worth. So I wouldn't think, oh, I've got bad people because they're not relaying the truth. Bollocks. It's human nature. The marketing person is going to say the show went great, and the seller might say that the show went badly. No information, none. Right? I knew you were going to say that anyway. So it can start at surprisingly small scale. And as you get bigger, certainly you have this problem. You see the messaging. On messaging, you see the blueprint, but not the house. What does that mean? You had a QBR session last quarter where the product marketing people presented the new messaging, and it looked pretty good. Well, that's the blueprint. That's not the house, right? Hey, sales enablement presented the plays and showed the top 3 plays we're running in sales. You saw the playbook, not the plays, right? You didn't watch a football game. You saw the playbook, right? And on, right? On win-loss reporting, you ask salespeople why they lost. Guess what they never say? Never. Me. Right? Like no salesperson on earth has ever blamed themselves for a loss. And that's okay, right? I'd probably fire the one who did. Like, go into marketing, you're too honest, right? Like, no. So on demos, you see the user conference big demo. You don't see the everyday ones necessarily, right? On testing, you see the certification, you see the exam scores, not the certifications. How are people doing in the onboarding program? By the way, just a quick piece of tactical advice. I think the best sales onboarding program ends with a lunch role play with the CEO. And as long as you can do it, you should, where we sit at a table and there's a paper tablecloth and I hand them a pen and I say, tell me about your company. Why do people use your product? What makes your product different from the competitors? What kind of hard benefits do people see from your product? And if you can do that, that's fantastic. I don't care if you can deliver a standard deck. In fact, I don't want you trained to deliver a standard deck, because that means you're going to do that with customers. I want you to be able to have the conversation over lunch. So there's ways around all of these problems, and I encourage you just to look out and say, where am I seeing the blueprint, not the house? Where am I seeing the playbook, not the play? And by the way, if you never hear, real life is messy, okay? And this is unfair because these are the top 5 worst things I've seen happen in 30 years. So it's slightly biased selection. But real life is full of stories like this. I flew to the UK and negotiated the contract for 3 days and forgot to talk about which currency we were in. Real story. So we thought we had agreement. No, we did not, right? Or literally one time, SDR, some VP said, SDR shouldn't talk about pricing. Tell that to the SDRs. They say, sir, yes, sir. Customer says, what's the pricing? Oh, well, it depends. What's the pricing? Well, it's really a function of Jesus, Phil, what's the effing pricing? Actual quote off a call. And it's like, we told them not to talk about pricing. We did it. This is a self-inflicted wound, right? But people are screaming at us. Third one happened to me. Second one happened to me. Your seller called 5 minutes before the big meeting, canceled, said that we weren't interested in your business. I had to eat a lot of crow, call the customer, apologize, gave it to another rep. It was deal of the quarter. True story, right? Think about how mad someone has to be to call and tell you that. So last one, all they talked about was us, all you talked about was them. Another real quote from a win-loss report. Shit, I think we over-rotated on the competitive training. Right? That's what I see when I see that. It's good that we train people on competitive, but now we've made them psychotic. They forgot to talk about the customer, right? And my basic answer is, if you're not hearing stories like this, do you know what's going on? Because real life is messy. You don't go fire all these people. I'm not saying that. I'm saying real life is messy. And if you're not hearing about the messiness, maybe there's a problem. Now look, some of you might be thinking, hey, wasn't CRM reporting designed to help us know what's going on? We've got these amazing dashboards. I've got these great reports. I can look at stage velocity, conversion rates by funnel step, win-loss ratios, close ratios. I know what's going on, Dave, because I'm on top of my CRM reporting. And I love CRM reporting. I worked for a year at Salesforce. Ran Service Cloud, not sales, but I worked there. Big fan of CRM reporting. And it's great. And I love all this stuff. If you read my blog, you absolutely know I love all this stuff after the yes. But let's remember the caveats. One, it requires a foundation of discipline and usage that most people do not have. So are you like building a castle on a sand foundation? Because if you define stage 3 one way, you define stage 3 another way, and I'm looking at stage 3 conversion rates, I'm counting angels on pinheads, right? It doesn't mean anything. So most people don't have that. So go do that, by the way. Go get the foundations in place. If you're not scrubbing the pipeline for how opportunities are valued, how close dates are entered, how stages are done, how forecast categories are done, right? But that's the ante. That doesn't make you special, right? It just makes the reports meaningful. Like now you can start to use them. And the real problem with CRM reporting is it only reports on people we engage with, right? And in some ways, being old is an advantage here because I lived in the world before CRM reporting, and we had a way to figure out what was going on. So I love all this stuff as an addition, but I think we forgot the old way. And I'm going to remind you in a minute what it is. But first, my picture. This is a QBR in ancient Greece. No. And they're looking at CRM reporting, 100 BCE. And CRM reporting is basically navel gazing, right? It's looking inward. And I had to look up navel gazing because I'd heard the phrase. It's actually a form of meditation where you stare at your navel. Try it. Let me know how it goes. But the point is you're looking inward, not outward, when you're looking at your CRM data. So go do that. It's good to look inward, but it's not enough. If you want to know what's going on, it's not enough. So what do? How do we connect our C-suite to the ground truth? Which hopefully, I've made the case, hopefully, that's important. that we really do need to understand the ground truth for both operational and strategic reasons. And I think there's 3 things you should do. You may do a lot of these already. And if you do, just in case, I'll cover some best practices on each one. Just in case you go, 1, 2, 3, check. Hang on, don't leave yet. We'll talk about how to do them well. But the 3 things, 1, use CI software. I think most people use CI already. Can I just do a quick show of hands? How many people use some form? Gong, Chorus, Jiminy? All right. If you're not, do. We'll talk about why, but then one takeaway, go buy CI. And I don't care from whom. Because it's going to tell you the ground truth of messaging. You're going to not just see the product manager present the messaging in the QBR, you're going to hear customers react to it, and it's super powerful. And sales execution. You can hear, you forgot to ask about next steps. Like, what happened? You're a salesperson, and you never ask for next steps at the end of the order, right? Second, third-party win-loss. How many people do that out of curiosity? Third party, hire someone else to talk to your deals. Cost $20K a quarter, maybe prices have gone up, 30. But you can get somebody to call your wins and call your losses and give you a report. And we'll talk about why that's important, but to me, it gets you at a high level of ground truth on deals. Sales is going to tell you their truth, right? The reason codes in Salesforce, if they're even properly done, will tell you sales' truth if they did it correctly. And then third, run an annual or inflection-driven market research. And this is the old way. This is the way we used to find out what was going on in the market. We'd ask people. And it costs money, and you need to hire an agency to do it. But the beauty of it is it's not navel-gazing, right? We're not just asking people in our database. We're asking people in the target market. And that's incredibly powerful. And by the way, while we're talking to them, we can ask a bunch of questions we want to know the answers to. Like, what are your business priorities? How do you rate this compared to that? Right? If you think about a solution in this area, who comes to mind? Have you ever considered buying any of these solutions? Yes or no? Why or why not? Right? As long as we're running a survey, I call this the hypothesis file, you could just keep a list of questions you wished you knew the answer to. And then when it's survey time, whip that list out and throw them in there in one form or another. So these are the 3 things. We're going to talk a little bit more about each one. I will say that for years, so I'm on the board of Jiminy, disclaimer. They're kind of a UK-based cheap and cheerful gong. But for years, before I joined the Jiminy board, I recommended Gong to everyone. I was like they should have paid me, they did not. But I was like a Gong evangelist, just saying, you have to get this stuff. And here's why. Darn, I missed the build. It's the next slide. Here's why. That's why. Because the first time you hear it, if you've not heard your ground truth, you literally want to crawl under the table. Like, it is that shocking if you've not done this. If you're doing it, you're probably used to it and you know that reality is messy. But if you haven't done it or you haven't done it in a while, you're going to be sitting there wanting to crawl under the table and thinking about the meeting you had yesterday where we were doing what is effectively nuancing on like a level 3 message that doesn't matter at all, where we're just completely imploding on level 1 messages, right? So this is why you want to do it. And what is conversation intelligence software? Not to be confused with conversational AI or conversational intelligence. That's an interaction style. This is just intelligence on conversations, typically used in sales, sometimes in customer success. And what you're doing is listening in. Do you mind if this call is recorded? And you get all this value. And we'll talk about it in a minute. But basically it means you get to listen to calls and you get to ask for proof when people make assertions. You say, really, can you give me 5 call samples where that happened? I'd like to hear them. I recommend this to literally everyone I work with because it connects you to reality. You can hear the messaging as delivered, hear questions asked, see tactics and responses, coach, etc. Don't use this public shaming tool. I must confess, the first time I did this, I did that. Shame on me. Didn't go well. Nobody wanted to use the system. Bad Dave, right? So praise in public, criticize in private. Took 30 years to figure that one out. But don't use CI this way, right? Use it not as a punitive measure, but as an improvement measure. You'll make more money if we listen to this call together and I give you some coaching on it. This is why you want to do it, because it's cringe, and then you get used to it. And look, I view CI as having multiple layers of value. So if you already use CI, the question is, what layer are you at? Because the baseline functionality of CI is you basically get a call library, right? You have a library of recorded calls. You can use it for coaching. You can use it for collaboration. The next layer up is analytics and alerting, so talk-listen ratios. I had lunch the other day with the CEO, and first thing he said is, I'm trying to get my talk-listen ratio to 45-55. Because right now, I'm at 50-50, I think, or 55-45. Right? I thought it was pretty cool. I was like, wow, you really bought into this stuff. And you view as like a company, or at least a sales level KPI is your talk-listen ratio. By the way, Gong research says the perfect ratio is 57-43. So if you want to be super anal about it, we need to be listening 43% of the time. You listened 42. But yeah, keep the old adage in sales before we had the technology is you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Sorry, 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in proportion, right? And so all numbers point to the same direction. We talk too much in sales. Alerting, you can alert by topic. How often are we talking about pricing? How often are we talking about competitor X? Frequency of interaction. I actually believe, I don't know for sure, but this was an emergent use case. Like this stuff was never designed for that. And then sales VPs figured out, hey, wait a minute, the people we talk to more close more often. So I can just literally look in Gong at the interaction history and see if we're talking to somebody a lot near the end of the deal, that's probably a really good sign, and if we're not, it's probably a really bad sign. So you can use it for kind of triangulation forecasting. The next level up is process and methodology. Most startups don't have a sales methodology, but at some point you will, and you can use the tool to reinforce the methodology. If you don't have a formal methodology, you still may have a framework. Like in an initial call, I want you to introduce yourself. I want you to ask these discovery questions. I want you to talk about these customer references. And I want you to talk about pricing and talk about next steps. And in each of those, I want you to say this word 2 or 3 times. I want you to talk about it. You can put that in one of these systems, and you can do automated scoring against it. You say, remember that framework we trained you on? Well, here's your score on that framework done by the system. Pretty cool, right? No human involved on the coaching. And then the top level is just business. It's not just, but it's really transform your business. If we're trying to change our CAC payback period, we're trying to move the needle on a major metric. What sales metrics do we need to move to get there? And you can use these systems to put strong focus on those metrics. The second of the 3 advice recommendations is do third-party win-loss. This is a pretty simple recommendation. It's do it. There are lots of vendors out there who do it. That's an actual win-loss report that I had done in 2018. Still had it lying around. It was 97 pages. I put it there. And they did it was pretty comprehensive, right? You see 8 losses, and then the second block is wins, 10 wins. So they took a hard look at what was going on. And the advantages of this are it cuts through the nice factor. Like customers want to be nice. They don't want to tell you bad stuff. They're more likely to tell it to a third party. It cuts through management spin. Management's always going to put a happy face on things. And it gives you a second opinion on the real reasons. I'm not saying this is unilaterally right and sales is unilaterally wrong, but at least you have two opinions, right? You have three, actually. You have your Salesforce win-loss and the reason codes. You've got what sales is saying, and then you've got the win-loss report. And then you could try and figure out what's going on. You could try and figure out what reality is. The last recommendation is run an annual or event-driven proprietary market study. Almost very few startups do this. And you can hire firms who will do this. This is circa 50K, maybe 50 to 75K to do one. This is what the table of contents was from one I ran, which absolutely changed that company. It was the best thing that ever happened to that company. The management team didn't agree on the situation, shocked. Some thought Microsoft was a great partner, some thought it was terrible, right? Some thought they should be targeting industry X, use case Y, other people disagreed. We said, you know what, I'd love to know the answers to all those questions. I'd love to know how customers feel about those problems. Do they think it's bad that we run in a Microsoft stack? Do they think we should focus on the CDP use case, et cetera? And we did this. This particular one we ran with top-line strategy. And it was fantastic for the company. And because I've run a lot of these, I have a few tips on how to do them well. First, hire someone who does it for a living. There are people who do this. And just remember, these guys are actually in two businesses. They work with marketing departments to help vendors figure out what's going on. And then the other part of their business is they do PE due diligence. So they can actually give you an investor view on your business as well as a customer view on your business. So they're actually super useful because they're playing both sides. Make and maintain this hypothesis file, this list of questions you'd love the answer to. I always, when I'm in an E-staff meeting, I listen for assertions that are really opinions stated as fact. Nobody's ever heard of us. Customers can't see the value. Right? People will say this in a meeting. Typically, it's unchallenged. And my first reaction is always, that's actually an opinion, not a fact. You stated it like a fact, which irritates me. but it's an opinion. And in fact, I know how to measure that. I can go hire one of these people and go measure that and find out if everyone has heard of our competitor and not heard of us. Because maybe that is the problem. And if that's what's going on, I need to fix it. Maybe it's not. And it would be really wasteful to spend money fixing a problem that doesn't matter. So those are some other examples of these things that are often stated and rarely challenged and that are fully measurable through this kind of research. So to wrap up, who'd have thought this simple question, what's going on, could pack so much punch, not just operationally, but strategically? To answer that question, we want to connect our C-suite to the ground truth. To do that, we need to do three things. Get CI software and use it, do third-party win-loss, and run these studies either on an annual basis or when you're at kind of an inflection point, when there's just so many questions piling up and you're like, I need to know the answer to these questions. So thanks for attending this today. I'll be putting the slides up later on Kellogg, and I think we're just about out of time, and I'll go back to the SaaStock guys. So thanks very much. Take care.
Awesome. We got one question that came in. Okay. If we can keep you here for 1 second longer.
Yeah.
I'm going to read this question, and then we're going to take one more if you have one from the audience, okay? All right, so this question. How do you get lower-level sales reps to be honest with executives? Implying that they're not honest.
Yeah, there is an implication on the question there. I would guess they're mostly afraid. I mean, because you have a lot of positional power delta, right?
Yeah.
You said a low-level sales rep against a big executive. You got to somehow reduce that power gap or create a safe space for them to answer. Frankly, I would probably use an anonymous survey. The old suggestion box, right?
Box.
Something literally where you don't have to confront power to raise something.
There you go. That's great. And does anybody have one question here from the audience? We got time for just one more. Anybody else? No? Okay, fantastic. Going, gone. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Round of applause.